former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Welcome to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. I'm your host, Rich Giardino. Tonight, we have a very special guest, Dr. Christina Lane, who's the founder, co-founder, and director of the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage College in Albany, New York. Dr. Lane and I first met when we were working together on a 2015 cold case we have in Fulton County, which was the finding of a female's body, very decomposed, and we're still working on it today. I first met Dr. Lane when she was working at St. Rose, and she had just started the program in 2018. And so join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Lane. Good. I can't say good evening, but welcome to the show, Doctor. We appreciate it.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background and then how it transitioned from your starting at St. Rose with the unit and where we are today?
All right. So the unit itself, we created it because of the rising crisis of cold cases. So the Department of Justice actually in 2018 declared that there was a cold case crisis. So Dr. Kunkel and I, so Dr. Kunkel is a forensic psychologist and I am a criminologist, thought that in order to assist the cold case crisis to find an innovative way to utilize the students as interns that are interested in the field of criminal justice to assist on cases. Now, I would not like to use the word assist to be truthful. The students are more like a resource, and the experts, such as Dr. Kunkel and I, we organize the students to actually produce a tool that law enforcement can utilize to assist to them getting to these cases.
So when you first started, it was more, it took a couple of years to get formed to where you are today. And what's important is, can you talk a little bit about Russell Sage, that, the students, people can apply if they have a particular interest and they're already at the school, they can apply. But if they're looking at colleges and they have an interest in forensics or law enforcement or criminology, that it's a great opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about Russell Sage? And this is the first year, January of this year is when you actually kicked off the Criminal Investigation Resource Center, correct?
Correct. Russell Sage College, because of their tenets is to be, know, and do, and their engaged learning practices, they were very happy to welcome what Dr. Kunkel had with the cold case program, because that's exactly what we do, is we utilize the students and teach them the theory and the background and understanding cases, and then they actually get to use what they learn and assist law enforcement and victims' families. So it's a terrific place to be acknowledged and respected that way.
Thank you. So when a case comes in, so somebody, a parent, a spouse, contact you and say, we read about you or saw you online. Could you help us with this case? What is the protocol and where do you start? Because a lot of the material and a lot of cases you guys investigate, and I say investigate in a loose sense of the word, that you look into our public domain. There's been TV shows, there might be articles and other commentary and websites about the missing people or the dead ends that came with a case of a deceased. So I'm Mrs. Smith. I call you and say, my daughter's been missing for 5 years. I'm frustrated. I'm upset. What are the steps you take in dealing with me, Mrs. Smith? And then how do you reach out to law enforcement? And what are the boundaries or parameters you have to stay within?
Okay, so it's actually, we really change things in the goal and purpose. We are truly a tool to be utilized by law enforcement now. So we have formal partnerships with law enforcement. However, if families do reach out to us, we are more than happy to be helpful, to act like a liaison. I would reach out to law enforcement and let them know that so-and-so is looking for ideas or assistance on the case. And if the law enforcement is interested in working with us, we would be happy to help and be utilized that way. Or we can guide them. Like there is one mom in New York City that I met on Missing Persons Day, and like to submit her DNA on 23andMe, which can be utilized by law enforcement. So that could be nationally obtained if her daughter's body is found elsewhere beyond New York State. Or we can reach out to DCGS, the Missing Persons Clearinghouse. So we have developed a lot of network connections to assist people that have questions, but we really end it at that point. It's just like, these are people you can talk to. These people are very happy to talk with you. However, we do not endeavor in really working on these cases as much as we used to anymore.
So, but one of the things you do is you take and you do name us, and you can explain what name us is to our listeners. And then you also gather information from the public domain, and you and the students come up with possible theories to look at it from a different perspective, maybe than we in law enforcement may have seen, or you may pick up something. Particularly in our case, when we discussed it, the students did a ton of research on their own. When we said, this is what we have a wig, or we have a shirt. This is a picture of the shirt. This is the markings and things of that nature. And the students went to work. So it became a resource for us without having to worry about them taking the shirt or them taking, taking the evidence, So tell us about NamUs and tell us about like the missing persons database. What are some of the things you would do in general terms to access so your students have a familiarity with the case they're looking at?
Well, we don't, NamUs is not our wheelhouse. That's law enforcement to have access to that. So to order to access, the missing persons database, that would be for having them contact the investigator that's assigned and have further discussion with that. What we really do is so we have formal arrangements with police departments, and then they assign us an actual homicide. And they give us everything they have on the homicide, including the crime scene photos. So what we do is we organize the case. And as you probably already know, organization is key with these cases. And we don't organize it the way most departments organize it, like by date, all the depositions, or it even could be, binders of lead desk comments, or just by how they were processed day by day, but they're not organized by theme. So by doing a thematic organization, it's really interesting how the puzzle pieces actually come together, and you find these patterns, and you also find these alibis start falling apart. So just by the nature of organization, the law enforcement, when they sit down, they can actually see the case in this put together fashion, and I know what to do next. Not only that, we digitize the entire file so that law enforcement can use keyword search. So if you step away from the case and you go back to it, you're like, what was that person's name again? And you could just keyword search and it will pop out throughout the document. Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because you got to follow up once you're done this. Go ahead.
Okay. We also offer, expert services. So, we do have people that can assist. We have Frank Gallery, who offers statement analysis, and he actually trains across New York State how to do statement analysis on certain interviews that are in question. Of course, we only do this with permission of law enforcement. Dr. Chris Kunkel actually does behavior assessments if needed. So if a certain homicide is of a sexual or deviant nature and it's not your standard type of homicide, he's more than happy to do that because he has plenty of experience doing expert testimony and such. And we also have a forensic anthropologist and many people in the New York State agencies that I can reach out to assist and give comment and what might be done next. Another thing when it comes to organization is like the forensics. Let's take a case from 1964. Like you might have 6,000 pages right there. Then all of a sudden you still want to work on the case agency, but you lose out of touch what was been done because you have all these pages. So what the students do is we organize the forensics. We create easy access charts. So you can say, okay, the suspect, what have we done related to the suspect? And you just look across the chart and you can see what has been done. So as you can see, it's clearly a tool. and also with expert suggestions that come with it too, if requested.
So interestingly, let's take our 1964 case, hypothetical case. What happens with law enforcement is the next case that comes in the door, the recent case becomes the priority.
Yep.
Somebody who's working on a cold case retires, moves on. The case sits dormant for a year or two. Somebody decides we got to reopen this. So your work is invaluable in putting back those pieces together, because for one person to read 6,000 pages or 4,000 pages of reports, statements, and things to catch up, only to know that in 2 years they're going to be moved on and we got to start all over again. That alone is a tremendous benefit to law enforcement. So I commend you for that. You're listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. Our guest tonight is Dr. Christina Lane, who is the co-founder and director of the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage College in Albany, New York. Please, if you like the content of today's program, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, Rumble, and all other platforms, and X, and all other platforms that have excellent podcasts and mine. So, Doctor, now bring us fast forward to now. So, like, how many students would be in? Is it a semester course or is it a year course? How many students would you have in working at in the center?
Well, right now, it's not a course anymore. It's a true center. So the students could get internship credit, work study, or they can actually volunteer. The students have to qualify. So they would have to take preferably a course from me, or they would have to get 2 references from professors to say these individuals are very reliable. They show up for class, they do their work, and they come across as good students. After that, and I interview them, also Dr. Kunkel, they have to be willing to be fingerprinted and also do background checks and upload it to NCIC. And after we do all that, they have a couple NDAs to sign, and then they're welcome to be part of the center. So we take a lot of precautions because we understand it is a great privilege for law enforcement to allow the students to have this experiential process of learning. And what's really important here is many of the students want to become law enforcement, which I find incredibly exciting. So it's great to have law enforcement come into the center and say, you interested? Why don't you come to us? But the students go through a process. I want them to be involved a minimum of a year, because the first semester, if we go by time frames, they are just getting familiar with the case and organizing the case. And then we start making suggestions and interacting and meeting with the various police agencies and have discussions what should be done next. So they are monitored. We have not surveil, but we have video cameras. So if there's any misbehaviors, anything we know, and also maybe this never has happened, but make sure all documents are securely put away and respected. So I've never really had to do it, but if the students don't seem to be contributing their time, they are asked to leave. But I've never had that. Students, it's actually the opposite. The students stay more than a year. They stay after they graduate too, if they can, because they really like to see themselves being useful as a young adult, and what they do can make a difference.
Can you tell us about maybe some past cases that you've worked on, either at St. Rose or at Russell Sage? Some of the items, either cases that have been solved or some assistance. And one precaution is that a lot of these may be active cases still, so we're not allowed to really get too much into them. I just want our listeners to understand that. But can you, before we go into any current cases, can you give us some past cases that the students have worked on that you can disclose, if there are any that you can talk about?
Yes, the cases that I'm going to bring forward are actually cases that are public knowledge, because we have attempted with police, the rage was to utilize podcasts and actually give as much information as you can to actually motivate people to give more information or tips. So I will keep my guidelines on what's publicly available. So the first case is the Ruth Whitman case that we work with Colony PD. And with Colony PD, we had the partnership with them since 2019. Kevin Terry came to us And he said that he's been working on the case since 2012 and presented cases to cold case committees and so on. And he would love to see if there would be a difference of having fresh eyes on the case. With the students of working on the case, organizing it and digitizing it, what's really exciting that it was a case that had no physical evidence. And because of the right officer and also Colony Police Department being so duly motivated to resolve this case, which is 1959, they actually exhumed the victim. They exhumed the victim, I think it was, time goes by fast, 2021. And the reason why they exhumed the victim is because she scratched her assailant. And we were very lucky where she was buried, there was little water damage. And we thought that there is a good chance, based on a forensic anthropologist and looking at the area and so on, that we might be able to get DNA under the nails. Well, phenomenal. We did get DNA under the nails. And this is because of Detective Sergeant John Santorio and his other co-workers at Colony PD. They were able to do all the legal work and get this to happen and get the permission from the victim's family. And the wonderful thing at the end of this, you would think that the family would be upset about the exhumation. They weren't. The thing is they thought that their sister or aunt's case went cold is because the police didn't care, because they were disadvantaged. And for the motivation and getting this case come back to life again made them feel like, oh, she did matter. People did care. And it really made, I believe, law enforcement look terrific, that they did everything possible. And it's a lot of work to go through all the paperwork to get permission to exhume a body and the funds that come with it. So, and it was exciting that we actually found a DNA there. And Colony Police right now are taking buccal swabs from various people or offspring from suspects and seeing if they can find matches on that one case. So I don't necessarily, a case being solved is a success. That would be great. But just getting motivation and a case to come alive again and investigators to look at something and say, I can do something now. We can do so much now is all we're looking for. That's why we call ourselves a resource center or a tool.
Yeah, everything has changed. Our program recently is Robert Garrow. Robert Garrow was a serial killer in the Adirondacks, and there was a list of X's on maps that they traced some bodies to him, and they're all there's some missing bodies. There was quite a number of potential victims, and what we found is that in discussing that one case would lead to another, information would be supplied. We were going to, and we probably are going to do a mini documentary on what would happen if the Garrow case happened today as opposed to the 1970s, early 70s.
Well, you think that's a question for you though, Rich. Do you think the buried bodies case would meet, legal questioning right there?
No, it would give us so much information. If we had video cameras all over, the GPS, the phone, the cell phones, the DNA, if we had the extent of the DNA, everything has improved dramatically, and it's quicker. It's more, every year we're getting more breakthroughs. In fact, if somebody, tell us about Rose Whitman. So if somebody has information on Rose Whitman, who went missing in 1950.
Yeah, it was Ruth Whitman.
Ruth.
She didn't go missing. She was found deceased in a drainage ditch in Colony.
Okay. And how old was she at the time?
She was 18.
And so if somebody has information, they can reach out to the Colony Police Department and ask the investigative unit. Now, what publicly might somebody know? Like it's a long time ago, but you don't know if somebody made a deathbed confession. You don't know if they confided in somebody and the person was afraid to say something, but with the passage of time, they may. And as the passage of time goes, so does the case get colder. So anything you know about Miss Whitman, feel free. If you remember it, there's tons of information online about the case. You just Google it and and you can track it yourself and say, geez, I remember my uncle said this or that, or, somebody I know, my grandfather went to school with her, you never know what's going to turn into a lead. So I think it's important that we have come so far. And like you said, and even if it's not closed, it's part of the closure. Part of it is that we've done everything we can. And so I always like it when people come to me and say, we want to reopen this, or we want to take a second look at it. And it's a good investigatory experience for the young guys and women who come into the agency. It's good for the families that we're trying. Unfortunately, sometimes people will run with some theory they have, and then they hear something from a drug addict or this or that, and it compounds the situation, because it's not all of the rumors pan out, and they sometimes families grasp onto one fact or somebody who reaches out to them who has a motive, and they stick with that, and not a motive for the murder or the missing, but a motive to curry favor with the prosecutors or police on something. So we experience a lot of times where we get people who will come to us and say, hey, I got information, but I want a reduction on my charge. So it's automatically suspect. So again, you're listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. And today we have an excellent guest, Dr. Christina Lane, who is the co-founder and director of the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage. And what's interesting is she has been involved in this field for years, and she, together with the co-director, Dr. Chris Kunkel, deal with a unique program to get college students integrated into the criminal justice system's forensic crime scene investigation and be an extra set of eyes for law enforcement. You can listen to this podcast. If you like it, please share it and listen on Apple, X, Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and X, and all other excellent podcast platforms. Now, Doctor, give us the other cases, because we talked about the first case. What are some of the other cases that your group has worked on, or your resource institute has worked on?
I'll also add, it's related to the Ruth Whitman case with Colony PD in 1959. And we are also working with the Elmira Police Department on a 1964 homicide of a 12-year-old girl. And what's interesting, once we get these cases organized, and also the detective notes kind of put together, we can actually figure out where the crime scene was. And these both cases, they were both in the woods, and we walked with law enforcement. From the detective notes, we found where Ruth Whitman was actually found on the road, and it was phenomenal. 1959, you think it would change? It didn't. The woods were right there. We were able to determine and measure where the body was. It was terrific. The Elmira, the young girl was found deceased in the woods, kind of off like a lover's lane. And we found also the location of where her body was in the crime scene photos. And we figured out where the heavy rocks were taken from to cover her body. And this gives a whole different perspective of finding where the actual crime scene, and actually putting more contextual factors to saying, I have a deeper understanding of this case now. And law enforcement is very kind. Not only am I allowed to be there, and also the co-director, they also allow us to invite students to participate when we're locating the actual original crime scene, and for the students to actually have a deeper understanding of what they're trying to piece together. And it's phenomenal. You would never think that trees and learning to read trees are helpful in actually pinpointing where the body's found. And in both cases, we used a field biologist to say, yes, that looks like it's the same tree over growth at the same time. So it's really, a moving experience and understanding, which I'm sure you already know, by actually seeing the crime scene, no matter how old, actually gives a better perspective in understanding what truly happened in the reconstruction.
Yeah, I have had the benefit of going to the murder scene in the Adirondacks of Robert Garrow, where he killed a kid from Schenectady, went to a mine shaft where he buried another girl, went to a cemetery where he hid another body. And it's just, you get there and I have this 3.5-year-old German Shepherd that is the friendliest dog, quiet. We brought her to where they found the body in the mine shaft. She went nuts, absolutely went nuts in the car, barking. And then I brought her up to the cemetery, different reaction, not the same reaction, but she went nuts when we went to the mine shaft. And it's not like her to do that. She's so mellow. And so, sometimes they say animals feel or sense things, but it gave you a creepy feeling. And the other thing is, we went to the cemetery where the serial killer was buried, and it was overgrown. It's the same house that he grew up in. His brother still lives there. His mother had lived there, and it was fascinating. I've also, when I've traveled cross country, I tried to find Ed Gaines' house, and for those who don't know, Ed was a serial, not really much of a serial murderer. He was digging up bodies and taking the corpses and skinning them and trying to rebuild his mother who had died. And he was he was a monster. There's a documentary coming out on him, but they used him for Hannibal Lecter. They used him for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I tried to locate the street that he supposedly lived on in the middle of the country out Midwest, and that was difficult. But I went to the gravesite of Matthew Shepard in Wyoming. That was interesting. And it's a morbid curiosity. And I think those of us in law enforcement, find it fascinating to go and look at those scenes and say, okay, this is where it happens. This makes sense. It's isolated, but it's close. How come somebody didn't see something sooner? And it raises a lot of questions, but it's fascinating. Tell us about another case that you've been working on.
Sure. I do have to add, it's interesting that you mentioned Robert Garrow. He's actually one of the suspects, which is publicly out there, of Ruth Whitman. And one of the rule of thumbs that we've developed with cold cases is that there's a serial killer around every corner, and you have to try to push him away. But Robert Garrow, he was her neighbor. He was at the fire that she was watching. So it was really interesting how he is one of the top suspects for that case. So he's prolific. He definitely was a very busy individual.
So that was on the Whitman. That was on the Whitman case.
Yes, the Ruth Whitman case. Yeah, we did a lot of work. We went to Hamilton County, and we did a research on the transcripts and everything that he said too. So we did a lot of work and got privy to some evidence that is very helpful. I truly think with Robert Garrow, I think it'll be terrific to get a task force together because he did leave hints of where his possible other victims were. But that's for another day, right?
Right. Another show. We can do another show just about.
That's right. Well, let's talk about Garrow. So the other cases I will talk about Albany Police Department. They were our first police partner. So when we first opened and announced the Cold Case Analysis Center, which Dr. Kunkel and I developed and brought the program to Russell Sage College, Albany Police, and they're still our formal partners. The first case was Blackburn, which is out there publicly. And what was interesting is that, like you mentioned, the family reaches out to you. Well, the family members reached out to us. And what is really interesting when you learn more about the family is the one woman, her aunt was the victim, and she was the one who found the body. And usually the family members who find the body are very determined to try to see these cases through. And so she found her aunt dead in 1964. And then in 2018, she's still finding ways to get her aunt's case to move forward. So she found a way and got a hold of me. And as soon as I asked her questions, well, which law enforcement, is his jurisdiction? And she said, Albany Police. And I contacted Albany Police, and they're like, a family already reached out to you? That's great. And I said, let's see if we still have the files. And they looked into it and they found the files. And that's how I met now Commander Melissa Morey. She's been the person I've been working with ever since. And we've been working on this Blackburn case since then. And to see this case here has a lot of characteristics of an organized serial killer in a sense. He had a lot of paraphilias that were present, and it's something that you would only see on TV, because most homicides that we've been exposed to, they're dead, but nothing much was done with the corpse. But in this sense, a lot was performed on this victim. So for working with this and actually developing contacts and bringing Albany PD in contacts with the FBI, we found a way to do genealogy on an item of physical evidence that had enough DNA strength to do a SNP.
Good.
Yeah, and a SNP is what's required to do genealogy. And not only that, we raised close to $19,000 to do modern technology on the case. So we write grants and so on. Like I said, we're a tool to move these these cases forward. So we raised the money, we did MVAC, then we moved over. And because our ties with a retired FBI agent, he was able to put Melissa in contact with the FBI case manager. And they review these cases every 6 months. And they said, we'll do the genealogy, but not the SNP. So we raised money and wrote the grant with Seasons of Justice. And through that, we were able to get the SNP done through Orthram. And now we're in the slow process of trying to find the proper familial branch of the suspect that we think is related to the one item.
That's interesting, because we recently, and you and I are aware of this, but probably many listeners aren't, New York State was a very rare state in that we could not use the lab and the DNA to find family members of an unidentified victim. And it had to go through the state health department, it had to go through DCJS, it had to go through forensic testing and all these different layers, because we had always wanted to take the 23andMe or any of those and say, well, we've got our victim, we don't know who she is. And so now New York State, as recently as 2 years ago, approved the use of DNA to help identify family members of the victims, because before it was strictly limited to identifying potential suspects. So that's a fascinating thing. Give us another case that you said you had.
Sure. The other case is a case that was just a recent breakthrough, and that is the Baby Moses case, Albany PD. Baby Moses was a case that was assigned to us by Lieutenant Josiah Jones, but of course, Melissa Morey, commander, she was also involved. And he gave us that case to organize and put it together in a more easier to understand format. But we also found a way, the FBI, the one agent we were working with, he networked, and the FBI said that they would actually do the SNP and the genealogy for free. And they actually identified, as we already know in the news right now, the mother. And which is terrific. It was a neonate. A neonate is a baby that was only a couple hours old, deceased and found in Washington Park by a flower bed below the Moses monument. So it's very exciting to see how it's happened. She has been arrested, claimed not guilty. And I'm really excited to look forward to see how that turns out. And I'm not taking credit for this at all. I'm just happy to see that we were able to assist in some way, but it's really a whole teamwork, and a lot of credit to the law enforcement that were involved in that case to see it through.
It's so rewarding, especially for the students, to see these. And whether it's a major breakthrough or a conclusion, if it's a breakthrough, we're in the right direction. Can you tell our listeners where they can find out more information? I did mention Russell Sage and just Googling things, but where's the best place if you're a student interested in getting out of high school and going to college, or if you're in another school and you're interested in forensics? How to get to the program, and then more information that people can follow if they're interested in helping or trying to solve cold cases?
Okay, so if there's any tips for certain cases, you're welcome to contact the Criminal Investigation Resources Center. And my email is unresolvedcases@sage.edu. or you can also Google the Criminal Investigation Resource Center. The only way you can be part of this program is you have to be a student of Russell Sage. It is one of our law enforcement partners that said that is needed to put more teeth into the NDA besides being found criminally liable. So you do have to have that. We don't take any people outside of Russell Sage because of that. So you definitely have to be a student, but you do not have to be a forensic psychologist major or criminal justice major. If you are in any other major at Russell Sage, you are welcome, but you will need to be vetted a little bit more to make sure that you're an individual of integrity.
So is there anything else you want our listeners to be aware of that they should when it comes to cold cases and things of that nature and investigations, or how they can keep their eye open to, I always tell them, see something, say something, because you don't know what's going on. But is there anything else from your standpoint that I didn't cover that you might want to mention?
I definitely do want to say, as our slogan is, but I think every law enforcement agency supports this, is that no victim is forgotten. Despite what other victims' families feel like that they are forgotten, the police don't care. It's not that they don't care. Just having the center that I have right now being successful, of course, it was a process of earning credibility and being reliable. To know that this center would never exist if it wasn't law enforcement really wanting to reach out to the families in their community and try to assist and find a resolution for the cases. So I really strongly believe that the community should know that.
And I appreciate what you've done and what your co-founders done, and the fact that the schools allowed it. One thing I find fascinating, the public loves to listen to cold cases and try to speculate on. And we had one where we have a missing girl for 16 years, Kelly Sue Ackernite. And I interviewed her. And in the future, I've interviewed her husband. We're going to be playing that in the future, because he got so upset because everyone said, arrest the husband, check the husband. So he called me and wanted to be part of a show to defend himself. So that's going to be on a future podcast. But I will tell you that in my experience as a DA, a police officer, and a judge, as a judge, I tried over 200 cases, including 40 murder and attempted murder cases. And no matter what I tried, I always found an interesting fact or learned something that I didn't know. And perhaps I use this one to tell people that back in the day, we used to put everything on a teletype computer, and it would go to the FBI and it would go to the State Division of Criminal Justice Services. Now everything's on computer, but back then you would send a teletype, and we had requirements. If a police officer was shot, you had to do it within a certain time and frame. 1994, an investigator or sergeant who only wore a uniform 2 times in 3 years was doing a parade duty in a uniform, and a 16-year-old in our county came up and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned and shot him in the face. The officer, he shot him a second time, and the officer deflected the gun. The officer got the bullet lodged in his throat. The officer lived. We had a huge manhunt, caught the 16-year-old. But he was shot. The officer was shot at the intersection. The investigator, Snyder, was shot at the intersection of William Street and Clinton Street. And within 15 minutes, like we're supposed to, we put out the bulletin, officer shot, we're looking for a suspect. And the Secret Service contacted the Johnstown police within 15 minutes of the teletype. This is 1994, wanting to know if William and Clinton had anything to do with it, because Bill Clinton was the president. So just like fascinating little tidbits,
Yes, it is.
And I taught at a community college, Fort Montgomery Community College, for 30 years at nights, and I taught at the law school for 3 years. And at the time all that was going on, there was a case where somebody walked right into the White House through the front door. I think Trump was the president, and they walked right into the front door, and the Secret Service was like, we're trying to find out how that happened. And I said, it's kind of funny, and not so funny, but funny, that they could take a teletype and connect Clinton and William Street to Bill Clinton, but somebody can waltz into the White House at the time, and I told the students that. But there's so many. I think one day I might even interview myself for the podcast, because I've had some very fascinating twists and turns and cases that, are solved. I have always walked away that, there's something called fate, and sometimes you can't change fate, the result. When I was a police officer in Yarmouth, Massachusetts, a family, grandparents and 2 kids got killed by a drunk driver, and we had been notified, and our portables weren't working. And we finally had to use a pay phone. It was 1983. I was summer in law school. And we had to drop a dime. That's how cheap it was. Called the department to report the drunk driver, because in the summer we were assigned to day at the beach, so we didn't have patrol car. We were dropped off in the morning and picked up. But we had portables. They didn't work, useless. So what happened is the department said, we have ambulances and fire and police in the way. The drunk driver, from the time a woman reported it to us to when he hit the family, was almost 5 minutes. And not that we would have made a difference, but we thought if we had a patrol car, if the radios worked, maybe we could have cut the drunk driver off. So sometimes fate plays a role in a lot of these things. And unfortunately, every life is a tragedy, and everybody, regardless of their station in life, regardless of what they did or didn't do, regardless if they were a prostitute or whether they were a drug dealer, there were people who loved that person.
Exactly.
And somebody suffering. So again, you've been listening to Dr. Christina Lane on the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. It's a fascinating show. I want to thank our guest again. Please like, share, and subscribe on X, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and all other platforms that do podcasts. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.